Hi everyone, how are you doing? Hi Michelle,
Hi.
how are you doing?
Oh, okay, just a little tired.
I know you guys were competing or working on the NCL stuff, right?
Well, yeah, but Dr. Lee also had his assignments on the weekend, so I had to divide my time.
Okay. Well, the good thing is Wednesday is a holiday. It is a floating holiday, so I don't know about all the other faculty if they're aware, but Cesar Chavez Day. So you guys get a little bit of a break during the midweek. So no class on Wednesday. Okay. And then we have upcoming spring break. So this week we're gonna do SNMP and then a little bit of data visualization. I tried to incorporate some script in the assignment, kind of covering a little bit of the lab portion. But since, let me double check MVC calendar. Yeah, so the 31st is the holiday. So I was looking into the issues that you have with IP last time we were doing the lab. I think it has to do with the modules are there and it keeps it's catching the error as it sees it as a warning. So it's not able to parse it for that type. And I think it relies on, I haven't dug a little deeper into the Windows side, but I think it has to do with like some of the packages, especially with the Nmap package. But I'm still trying to work out the solutions and why it's giving you that and not for me. So let me see. And then, but if you got the error in the last lab for that particular method, just take a screenshot of that and include it in your lab. That will be fine. Okay, we'll start in a minute. Check out the assignment in Canvas. And then I'll go into screen share. We got mostly everyone here, except for a few people, but so as I mentioned, the 31st, our Wednesday is gonna be a holiday. You're not supposed to have classes, so we will not be able to cover the lab. So I'm gonna try to work on show you how to write some of the script today. And then you can further explore by looking at the documentation. We're gonna go through next week, which is gonna be the 4th through the 10th. And then we're gonna go and have spring break from the 12th through the 18th. Okay, so we will cover unit 8 and then we're gonna take a break. And then when we come back, hopefully I'll be able to give you your project planning process when we come back for week 9, 10. So in week 9, we can start looking at our project options. And then we will continue with the rest of the chapters to finish up. And then we will have the final project and the final exam at the end. So it's gonna go into the next calendar, but June, I think the second week of June is when you finish. That will be the final. So I will release the final review probably about week 10, 11. And then I'll go over the questions as we complete the last part. Okay. So that's the projection for the rest of the semester. All right. Since it's 2:01, we're going to go ahead and get started. Let's go to the module. So in this week, we are going to look at network monitoring with Python. The first part is it talks about PySNMP. We're going to touch on the SNMP portion of it, and then we'll get into the data visualization using Matplotlib and PyGal, and then we'll touch a little bit on Cacti. As Cacti is more on using RDD tools, so at least introduce you to that so you know what to do if you need to use it. We won't have a lab this week, so we're just going to complete our assignment. And I try to keep it light so that way you can kind of plan out your week. I know a lot of classes are doing midterm and such, so there won't be a midterm in this class. As you just have a quiz last week. So we will prepare for another quiz when we come back from spring break. Okay. And I will not give you any quiz to prepare during spring break because that's not fair. Okay. So let me get to my notes and let me change the view. Any question before we start?
I was just going to say they have a sale on SD cards at Amazon.
Oh yeah?
You know, it's like 512 gigabytes for SanDisk for $56.
Oh, that's a good deal. I'm going to check it out. Thank you.
It ends tonight on
Okay.
Amazon.
Awesome. Thanks. I have Prime.
I found out.
Too.
Oh, I just found out you can have up to 2 terabytes on an SD card on a Raspberry Pi.
Yeah. Now on the new Pi, they try to be able to scale that out, but I think version 3 they didn't have too big of an SD then. But I've always used like you know, at least 32 gig. 32 gig goes a long way unless you have a bunch of stuff on there. But good to know. Thank you. I probably need it for my camera. But most of my camera can only use 64. So if you buy SD for Raspberry, at least start with 64 so you can scale that out. But thank you so much for that. I do need to. Yeah. Okay. So, all right. Michelle just told us that you can check out SD if you're looking for SD. I use SD on my Android phone and it helps a lot. That's the reason why I stuck with Android, because I just didn't like the idea of buying internal memory with the device, and Apple charges so much for just the scale for storage, right? But you know, if you have tablets that are Android, it's good to have SD added. Okay, so this week, let me close the alt text stuff. We're going to look at SNMP and we're going to look at some of the other library for graphing and visualizing the data. If you get into data science, you will work closely with Python and some of the other libraries. And this is very light going into data visualization. So just keep in mind that it's really tying back to what we would see with network monitoring. So last week we talked about how we would use the library to incorporate packet sniffing and then crafting the packet. But in this week, we're going to touch on the simple network management protocol, which is SNMP. So this is a protocol that we use in all different platforms to collect and manage devices. So in the case where if you have a very large data center, this is a very useful protocol to keep inventory of all your devices and also to gather the information for each device for management purposes. Okay. And SNMP usually it's incorporated with some of the network monitoring tools like Netmon for Microsoft and so forth. So it is equipped with all OSs. And for network appliances, you do see support on routers, switches, managed switch that is, and appliances that uses SNMP. So you can enable them, and so that way you can use that device to manage other devices. Okay. So here it gives you a little bit of information about different version of SNMP. And version 3 was released because version 1 and 2 had flaws and it was not widely adopted up until the end of version 2 in vendors. So since 1988, this protocol has been used to monitor networks. And what we see is that you can have a system that would be able to track and manage all the other systems. That's what we've seen with a lot of um, the infrastructure uh, base for this particular class, right? In the lab, the author notes that he installed SNMP on both client and server, but ideally you would only need it for the management system like a server that you would have to be able to track your devices and manage your devices. So the widely adopted standard was from version 2, but later on, what they did was they released the version 3 to be able to support cryptography and also to make sure that it's widely accepted across the device vendors. So we're talking about Cisco and some of the manufacturers that build network devices. And in those network devices, SNMP version 3 would be incorporated. Okay, so let's look at the first question. It asks you to describe the purpose of SNMP, which version of SNMP should be used and why. So SNMP, again, by definition, is the standardized protocol used to collect and manage devices. So if you wanted to query, right, or you wanted to find information about how many network appliances, how many systems, including computers that are connected, right, outside of using ping and the specific protocol, we can use SNMP to kind of keep inventory of our network appliances and devices. And we should use SNMP version 3 because it has cryptography features, which elevates the security. And it is also widely adapted with different vendors or by different vendors. Okay. Now, if you have older network appliance, right? And in the case with older network appliances, you can actually run updates on the, like if we're looking at Cisco, you can run updates on the OSI. And at one point, they would retire that particular appliance, meaning that they will no longer provide support for a certain type, appliance OS. However, this protocol been around for a long time, so you do see, incorporation with the later version with the OSI for the appliance. And if you're looking at some of the newer appliances like the Nesses, that's what we talked about in the past, right? When we were working with NC client and some of the script, you would see that those type of appliances with the OS API that's incorporated, you do have features with SNMP. Now, having SNMP equipped with the appliance doesn't always mean that it's enabled. So in the first part of the chapter, the author mentioned on how you would use SNMP and be able to map it out. Okay. So for the second question, in production, meaning that we would use those system for operation, right? The deployed system. Which system should have SNMP installed? We should use that for management hosts. And often those are servers. So in the example that's used in the text, the author uses Ubuntu server, but you might have other form of server or other Linux versions that you can use. So, or even you would have an appliance that manage other appliances. So again, you need to enable or install SNMP on the actual management host. And in the lab, he illustrated that he did the installation on both so he can actually show the verification, but you don't have to do that on the client side. Okay, so if you have PCs and switches and routers, you don't have to install SNMP on all of them. Some router and switches has the SNMP capability, you simply just activate it. Okay, so how do you install SNMP on the Ubuntu server? You would use sudo apt-get update. So we first need to push update for the OS. Then we simply do sudo apt-get install SNMP. So these are the two commands that you would use to install SNMP on Ubuntu. Now, if you use external third-party application, which many companies do, it comes with this particular feature incorporated, like a software tool, an application that you would use. And in that, you would have a suite of protocol that's already incorporated with that software. So that way you don't have to manually control it through the CLI. However, this is equipped, and so we can use it without having to expense for additional application. But I've seen many organizations use third-party software because it's user-friendly, it's convenient. But if you need to learn how to do this through the command line, you can do that. Okay, any questions so far? And you can find this information on the first part of the notes. So what you're doing is you would have a management system, and this management system would be able to acquire information about the agents. And so that would then send the information back to the management system by sending the response. You can also set the configuration onto the agents, and then be able to receive confirmation once that information is set. So you can initiate settings onto the actual agent. It would be like this. Okay. Now here it talks about the information being reside on the device. It's called the MIB. And so it would use object identifier, which is called OID, that would represent the information that can be read back as text. So when you are requesting information from the systems, the connected clients, what you see is when it's sending back the response, it's gonna fill in the information for the requested OID. And that information could be like vendor information, vendor contact information. It could be status. So there could be a lot of the details from generic general information to more specific setting information. And you simply use an IP address for the target system, like what we've seen in all the other type of libraries that we'll be using. Okay, so keep in mind that the object identifier that would represent the information that can be viewed or read back. So the example that's shown here is that you might want to request the device using a specific value, and it uses a numerical value to present the information to you. Okay, so a common OID structure would be interfaces, like how you are connecting the cable to the appliance. Like when we're talking interface, it could be gigabit Ethernet, it could be fiber, okay? And the OID, the vendors for these appliances, the manufacturer, they try to keep them, pretty uniform, but in some cases you would have to refer to vendor specific information. So they can also supply the OID details. And I know in the example that's shown in the text, the author mentioned that you can refer to Cisco, right? And Cisco would be able to have a list of OID information, okay? What kind of value that would represent a certain type of information that you can acquire. So now the main point is that because it is heavily implemented with information for the device agent, you need to make sure that this is an added feature for the management. The agents would require CPU cycle from the control plane to return the value. And it is not efficient in the scale up a very large. So you don't really query all the time, right? That's what it's saying, is that you're not going to query for the data continuously in small interval because it uses processor and that would take up the resources. So, and by requirement for compliance in network and security, we are required to maintain inventory and document inventory at least once a year. Okay. And sometime right before you do upgrades, right, you want to go back and you wanted to take a look at the status of your systems. So in that case, you would then use SNMP to be able to identify or manage your inventory. Okay, so we would do it periodically. Okay, so in the setup, after you have installed your SNMP, okay, you can use the SNMP to obtain information through options. Okay, such as vendor information for contact, like for support reasons, location, where it is physically located, because if you have hundreds and thousands of racks, right, when you have set it up, you can specify the location of that particular appliance, and we would use SNMP to query that, right? So we can also look at packet size. So here what it's telling you is that it would require a shared password or a shared key. And the example shown here is using Cisco iOS MIB locator. And Cisco has specific way to use SNMP tree. So think of it how it would branch out from one piece of information to the next piece of information. So what it does is then we would use a certain value to be able to branch and obtain that information from the agent. Okay. And what we have is we would then present that using string. So the secret here that would contain your password or your shared password or your shared key. And you would see the IP address of the target. Now the SNMP walk, that's going to walk you through, basically it allows you to navigate through the OID information for under that tree. So when you issue this, you need to give it a password, right, for that system. And in general, in the network environment, you would have like an administrator password or an elevated privilege password to be able to run this. Okay. So that will be privilege control for access across all your appliances. And here, the values that you see here, that would represent your OID. Okay. And so when you look at this, what you also need to do is you got to permit it certain device to be queried. Okay, because it's permission control. So think of it like information that's stored in a container that's on a device, and you're accessing that information in that container. So what will happen is that permission is going to need to be granted in order to access the detail. Okay, so what you need to really establish is that you got to make sure that you permit that type of information to be given from that device. And they implemented this so that way people just can't go onto your network and then use this protocol and start gathering information about your network. That will be deadly because you can find so much information about an infrastructure by looking at the network itself, right? So this is why we need to make sure that there is permission oriented management capability with this particular protocol. Any question with this? So what you see is that you can deny, right, unwanted queries because an attacker can come in, right, through a certain area and then be able to query. And that's what they would do. And to be able to navigate through it and looking at, so if we don't control this, right, we will have issues in disclosing that information about our network. Okay. Now with SNMP, this will work with Python. So one of the package that you can install is PySNMP. And this is an SNMP engine that would work with appliances that are able to accept Python script. And with this installation, you need to include another package, which is PyASN1. And this is a wrapper. So in order for your PySNMP package to work, you first have to install the wrapper package. Okay. So in the next question, it asks you, how do you install SNMP or PySNMP? What package are needed? So I wrote down here that you first have to install ASN1 wrapper. And the procedures are followed. So first we would need to change the directory to TMP. Then we need to access the package from Git. So you would do a Git clone, and if you don't have Git, you have to install Git, right? Remember that from last time? Then you would obtain the version, and the version that's shown in the text is this. But you can look at the documentation first and see which current version is that version compatible with what you're trying to achieve or your system. And then we can run the setup installation by doing setup.py install. And if you're using Python, different version of Python, remember that you can put in specific version like Python 3, like what we did last week. So after you have installed the wrapper, then you would install the PySNMP. So this package requires the wrapper in order to work. And again, we're going to change the directory to TMP. We're going to access package from Git. So we would put in the URL for where we would acquire that. Sorry, I meant to put directory. Then we need to change the directory to PySNMP. Now it's in the subdirectory of this. And then we would obtain the version. And then again, we would run the setup. And we want to look at the message to make sure that it's successfully installed. Right? And we can't always assume that when we issue the command, it's going to go. So if it's completely successfully installed, it will tell you in command line. So you have these available tools or packages that you can use outside of just using regular SNMP. We can use PySNMP in that we can utilize Python for this particular protocol. If you don't install the PySNMP, you cannot script in Python, right? You can simply just use SNMP commands. So what you want to do is you want to write the script that would automate some of this using PySNMP. And with it, you have to install the wrapper. Okay, and you can find the details. I took the screen capture from the text to show you there. And as we don't really require this week for the lab because we have no class on Wednesday, but if you want to, you can check it out with your virtual machines. Okay. Now, the information that's disclosed in the textbook, the details, the steps that he walks through in the installation and setting up the lab, it works with Cisco Viral. So just keep in mind that, you know, the way that's written is for network appliances. Okay. So if you try to test it using like Raspberry Pi or something, you might want to look at how you can use this to manage a bunch of Raspberry Pis, right? So the OID for that is a little different compared to your network appliances. Okay. So you can find the installation information on page 4 of your notes for PySNMP. And the example that's shown here is how it's used to query Cisco information from an appliance, from the router. So you notice that, and in the text it mentioned that it's using this particular RFC, which is an older, like in the first here, it talks about how this RFC is older. It's from an older version, but you can look at some information about SNMP and MIB resolution if you're looking for specific detail using a newer RFC. So here we have an import statement, and it's going to use the CMD gen, and we then would declare what CMD gen is, and this would allow us to generate commands using command generator. And then the third line is going to be the OID for Cisco. Okay. So what we're trying to achieve, right, in obtaining using the OID, or what we're trying to achieve is to obtain the MIB for Cisco. This is the detail that we're trying to use to get, right? Information about the manufacturer and the contact information, possibly for support in the website. Okay. So here it talks about how we can use the method, and also we can put the information into about varbinds. Okay. So here we have a for loop, and we want to be able to loop through so that way we can print, right, the string information that we acquired from that system. But you also notice that there is a password that needs to be passed there, which is secret. We saw that in the last one when we use SNMP only. So this stores the password that's shared. And then for the destination or the target, you will put in the IP. And this is the port. Okay. So we can simply loop through it to acquire the string. That's what is shown here. Here it provides some details about the actual program, right? When you're looking at the entire program. And it incorporated, you know, error detection and such for the results. So once you have the script, you would save it, right? And in this example, he saved it as pysnmp1.py, and then you use a Python command to run it, and you would get the output if it works. So to test this, we have to have a connected system, right? Like in our case, a router. And so it's going to go and pull the information from that router and then display that by using the script and the packages that was installed. Okay, any question? I think I have this is too large. Let me pull it and save a page there. Okay, so to really map out the tree information, this is an image that shows the OID tree. And so when you look at the hierarchy, it goes like that. Okay, so you have the .iso, .org, and so forth. So when you're looking at the object, because in the last script we were looking at 2 levels, so what it's going to do is going to map it from that to the interface, to the IF number, which is your IP number, to the IP table, and then down to the detail information for that particular device. So when it does the SNMP walk, what it does is it's gonna go from a branch down to leaves, and in the leaf is where the container, you know, if you think about like the data structure side, the container would store the specific detail about that particular appliance, right? Under, you know, some of the subcontainer. Okay, and then it's able to map it back with the interface and then through the connection of that particular appliance to be able to give you the object that you're asking for. Okay, so all of this shows you on how you can use, right, SNMP to show packet information from that particular appliance, right? When we look at the analysis for the network, so for example, if you have like an appliance that's failing or an appliance that's pretty unstable, so what you can do is you can assess the performance of that appliance, the throughput, that's what we would say, based on how many packets that would be inputting and how many packets that's outputting, okay? And then the size of that. And you do run into issues with network appliance running out of RAM, storage, or sometimes processor just dies, right? Because it's being overused and so on. So when you're looking at like a Cisco appliance like this one, you can gather the information about the packets. So now if we do it on the CLI, it would look like this. You would do an SH for show, and then you would point to the interface for that appliance. Like it would connect using gigabit Ethernet. So that's an Ethernet, right? And then you would ask for packet information. Now on the SNMP side, you would do a SNMP walk, right? You give it, you would plug in the login information, target IP, and then the OID, and you want to specify the counter, okay? So now if we take that and translate that into script, we have to define a function, right? So our function name is SNMP query. That's going to be able to obtain this, okay? So this is the information that you would get from just interfacing with that appliance. This is if you have SNMP installed and you would do the SNMP walk. But this part is where you would write the script in Python, right, to incorporate the query for the OID. So there are 3 separate approaches in obtaining the MIB from accessing OID. Okay. So similar to what we've seen earlier, right? But now here is where you want to use dictionary to be able to put in more details about the packet, because earlier we only pulling contact information from the manufacturer. Now this will allow you to be able to store, right, different pieces of information about the packet, like packet size, input, output packet, timestamp, etc. Okay. And once we have it with the dictionary, then what we can do is we can write the string to a certain file, results.txt. Okay. And then we can take this file and we can, we can use that to be able to for analysis purposes. If there are numerical value, we can graph it. And that's the whole point in this chapter, is to dump it out to a file, take that file and visualize it or analyze it. Okay, so right below this, what you have is you simply have the write file function, right? Like method, like what you've seen in CIS30A. Okay, so now this is showing how you can have that script executable script to run every so often, right? The way he shows us here is to run it every 5 minutes. Okay. And again, right, this is just for illustration purposes, right? Do we really run it every 5 minutes? Not unless you're investigating something. Okay. And you wanted to do the comparison from an increment of time compared to the previous increment of time. But other than, if you do like network forensic, you might have to take snapshot of it every so often. But in the case where do we really want to run it at every minute interval or every 5 minutes interval? Not necessarily, right? Because when you do this, the as we mentioned before, the CPU cycle would be utilized, and that will slow down that particular appliance. So when you have deployment system or production system, you don't really run it that all the time like that, right? We can set a time aside where we would run it when it's not so occupied. Okay, any question with this? Okay, so you would use cron job. Sorry about my email. I get bombarded with email every afternoon. So cron job, so that way we can set interval for our executable, and you can just create the script and then be able to set up for it to run, like what he would illustrate here. Okay, instead of using Ansible or something like that. Okay, no question on this area. Next, we're going to talk about data visualization. And basically, we're using libraries to plot, to graph, to show charts, right? Earlier, we said, yes, Michelle?
Just a general question.
I'm sorry,
is there any
I can't hear you. It's a little static.
Oh, so static.
You might have some interference somewhere, or internet might be a little spotty on your end. Okay. Well, whenever you're able to get better connection or have less interference, let me know. So we mentioned that we wanted to output the results into text file, right? And in the case where if we have numerical values like packets information, the number of packets, we can graph it. And, using that, we can have a visual of our output. So having that visual is important because what if you need to analyze it from 1 year to the next or 1 month to the next, or how your performance has changed. And ideally, from the security side, people always say that you want to have 99.9999% of uptime for your networks, right? Um, but are we meeting that threshold? So you can look at your network performance using SNMP, right? Your appliance performance, and then be able to have that incorporated with the visualization from Python using Python libraries. Okay. So here an example would be how much data was transmitted over the last week, right? Because you're looking at resources, resource utilization, for example, and then you can take a look at specific protocol in that traffic. And we would then use SNMP to answer those questions and then use the Python library like Matplotlib to visualize that information, that data. So Matplotlib is a 2D plotting library, and it uses NumPy mathematical extension. So you can use it to plot. You can chart, you can make bar graphs, pie chart, histograms, and it's very useful, especially in the area of data science. So to install it, we would use pip install matplotlib. And there are additional library that you can incorporate with this particular library, right? We touched on last week when we talked about Cacti, where you see that you can use additional library with this library to, visualize certain things, like if you're monitoring, if you're running something very similar to Network Sniffer and like Wireshark, etc. Okay. So the standard output would just be, we can put it into a file and it would be an image of the graph. So an example that's shown here is that when you plot it, you can do a line plot like this, or you can plot it with, you can chart it with as a pie chart, etc. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we're going to answer question 5 and 6. So what library is used for Python 2D data plotting of graphs and histogram? You can use Matplotlib. And to install it, we simply do pip install matplotlib. So now for 7, we want to write Python script using Matplotlib package to plot a line given x is 1, 5, 10, and 15, and y is 2, 20, 40, and 60. We want to save the graph output as graph1.png. So you can save it as a .png, you can save it as a .pdf if you're able to have PDF reader. And image, we want to save it as a .png so we can include that image into a document or, presentations, whatnot. So we would start with the first line, import matplotlib.pyplot as PLT. So what you need to do is you need to use pyplot. okay, from the Matplotlib. And PyPlot is a module, and Matplotlib is a package, which includes many modules, like what you've seen with Scapy. And here you can call it anything, but we're going to use, close to the example, we're going to use PLT. And then after that, you would use the plot method, and you would specify the X value in a list, and the second list would include the Y value. Oh, I have a 2, I should put a 2. Then you would specify the label, and whatever the string that you put in the parameter here, that would be the name or the label for that axis. So we can say this is the Y label, call Y or X. And if you have, you know, more detail, you would put X and Y. Is that 2 square brackets after 20? Yes. So let me switch to this real quick and I can show you. Oh, that might be my typo on my side. Yeah, I don't have a third dimension, so you can remove that. Let's remove that. I'm sorry. Might have been sleepy when I put this together. Okay. So whatever values you're trying to plot, you would put that into a list. And so if you refer to the notes, you can find that on, oops, on page 9 about. So this is the example right here. Okay, so we would use the plot method, and when we would use 2 lists, one for X and one for Y, then you would use the label method to specify the label for the axis you wanted to show, so you would use the plot, the plot.show. So this is going to allow us to display, and then we want to take that display and save it as, we would use the savefig method to save it as a .png file. Okay, so let's see. I'll leave it on here for a little bit and I'll explain the next one from the textbook. Any question with 7? Now, if you're using an IDE, don't forget that you have to enable the package even if you install it in your IDE, okay? And that goes back to last class and also the beginning of this class. Because even like, for example, I'm using Tawny. If I'm using Tawny, I gotta make sure that I bring in that package even after I installed it. Otherwise, because some IDE will not be able to see the package after you installed it. Most of them will be like that. Okay, so this one is pretty easy, right? Now we're going to do the next one. And we can use the example in the text. So again, this one we're going to use pyplot for number 8. And we are going to use pyplot and date modules. And the date modules are included with the package. So you just have to import them in. And we want to plot the unicast packets. So unicasts are, so we have different type of packets that would be sent across the network. Unicast is when it goes from one to another system. Okay, direct send from one to the other. Where broadcast, it's going to go from one to many system or all systems. Okay, so like a router, it would broadcast its SSID, right? Like a wireless router. So it's going to send to all the device saying, hey, this is my SSID, connect to me. Where unicast would be, you only send one piece of information or one packet to another system directly. And you would see this with, you know, if you have specific routes, if you have, you know, certain way that you would set up from the switch to communicate with another switch. So for question 8, it asks us to write the script using Matplotlib package and pyplot and date modules to plot unicast packets sent from the router given x-axis contain time and the y-axis contain unicast packet values. So our horizontal axis, which is x, is going to specify the time that it was sent. The y-axis is going to show the packet values, like how many packets that was sent that are unicast. Okay. So let me change the view real quick. Make it smaller. 20. Okay. So we'll start with importing pyplot, and you can add the comment so you know what's going on, like what we did in the last one. Then we would import dates, and you can specify the identifier here, how you wanted to call that. So we use PLT and dates. You can use DT if you want. Then we would have two empty lists, one for X and the other one for Y. And here we would say X time is a list and Y value is a list. Or you can say Y packet value is another list. Then we would open, and this would work from the previous one that you would create a text file. Remember, we have to acquire the details by using the PySNMP and output the result.txt. Otherwise, it would not work correctly. So here we would say with open, and the file from your SNMP result, we would read every single line. And it's going to take the line and it's going to put it into the dictionary. So it would append it under dates and append it under value. Okay. So when it reads the line, it's important that it does it as a dictionary because it's gonna use the key, right, to be able to plug that in. So once it reads it, it's gonna put it into X and Y list, right? And then it's gonna plot. So we simply would, in this one, we would use a subplot and ticks, and then the plot. So this allows you to have the rotation, and the way that it looks is going to be a little thicker than the last one where it's going to do the dotted points. Compared to the last one, it just gives you a straight line. Okay. So then we would put in the plot date, and we pass X time and Y value. Here you can add the title, for your appliance. The X label, you can put down the time, and recall that all system we use UTC. Okay. And then for the Y label, you can specify the output Unicast Packets. And I think we need to put router plot. I'm going to change this to. We want to save it as the router plot 1.png. So with this program, what we do is we would be able to have two axes. We would plot, right, time information, the time that that router generate certain number of packets. And then we also include appropriate labels, and we save the file. Or the plot as router plot 1.png. So with this, we incorporated two modules, PyPlot and dates, and that's under Matplotlib. You can use this for other things outside of routing and network appliances, of course, right? You can use it to graph data that you would find data sets. But in this script, remember that we use a file that was generated from the SNMP output. So if you have a text file that contains your data, then you can have it read the data and then put it into the graph. Text file works best if you use CSV. You can also use CSV. That's more on the Microsoft side, right? Question on this? Now, if you don't do this part, right, if you stick with like how you did the other one, then it will just graph the straight line. So we will touch on how we can do different type of charts using different libraries. And you can always refer to the documentation to look at how you would use other type of plot using Matplotlib. Okay, any question on this? We only have 12 questions today, so. Now we're gonna look at the next one. If you don't have any question for me. Oh, I forgot to include the last line there. Plot show. Don't forget if you wanted to display it. Okay. All right. So in number 9, you would write a script to graph a pie chart is using Matplotlib, given the information. Your router is 10%, your managed switch is 20%, unmanaged switch is 30%, security appliances 10%, your servers is 10%, and your client systems is 20%. So let's say that these percentage represent performance or uptime, whatnot, right? Pie chart should show label slices and appropriate ratio on each slice. The chart should make the router stand out. And we wanted to save the chart as pie chart 1.png. And if you, before I show this, you can always go to the documentation for Matplotlib, or you can just search. So the basic pie chart. So what we want to do is to chart it like this. We want certain information to be stand out, right? And in this example, they just show like frogs, logs, dogs, and hogs. So now what we're going to do is we are going to start with import matplotlib pyplot, like what we've done before, because we're plotting. And then I would declare my labels, okay, as separate strings. So all of these are going to go into the labels: routers, managed switches, unmanaged switches, security appliances, servers, client systems. And we want to use the appropriate order when we put in the sizes. So for your sizes, then we would start with the router at 10%, that will be first. Managed switch, that will be 20%, that's next. Unmanaged switch, that would be 30%, that's third. I have a 10 here and a 10 and 20. Yep. Okay, so security appliance would be a 10, server would be a 10, and my client system would be a 10. So the percentage is going to go into the list, and that would be in sizes. And the explode method here allows you to make the router stand out. So you wanted to give it 0.1 and the rest are just 0. That will be flat. And so if you want this to pop out a little bit, you would do the explode with a value.
Sorry, just to check. So labels is a list, so it doesn't need the. So you can still declare a list without the square brackets.
For the labels here?
Yeah.
No, because we're using the labels. So when we declare the labels, you just treat them as, yeah. So this is going to be individual labels. So what it's going to do is going to plug in each one in each of the label.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, this is coming from their documentation, and this is how it's looked like. You see how they use label like this? Yeah, I looked at several examples on this. I was curious about that too, why it's not inside a list, but it's using as a a variable like that. Yeah, so it's gonna plug in each one in that particular variable.
Okay.
Mhm.
When
Okay.
you're exploding it,
Mhm.
does changing the number higher or lower change the way it looks, or?
Yes, and you keep it
Okay.
at 0, it's gonna be flat. So the way that this looks is these guys are gonna be 0 over here. These
Oh no, I
pieces.
meant like if you did higher than 0.1, would it
Yeah,
be bigger or
it
less?
would just, yeah, so it would just pull it out a little farther.
Okay.
Mhm. Yeah, so it just pop it out a little farther. That's what it's doing. Because then you also need to also look at this. So what it's doing here is when you're using, let's go back to our code here. So after you specify how you want it to explode, so this is a method that's built in, right? To make it stand out. And then when you do the subplot, it's we use fig1 and x1 here. X1 is gonna be for our pi pieces. And we're gonna bring down whatever the value for the explode. It's gonna bring it here. It's gonna plug in the labels, right? And then it's gonna format. So if you want shadow to show like little shadow reflection, you can put true. And then for the angle, that will be 90%. So when it shows it, will be like this. And here we have a little shadow on the edges. And if you search for basic pie chart, you would find it on Matplotlib. Okay, same example. And then we want to save. Don't forget, we wanted to save the file or the figure. So we would say piechart1.png. And then if you wanted to display, you do a show method. Use the show method there. And there are lots and lots of tutorial too. So if you want to check out like other style, how you want it to display, make it look better, you can use that. You can use resources on their documentation. And I saw some stuff on W3C. They have like the basic tutorial, but you know, and of course I'm sure there are videos everywhere for this. Okay, any question with pie chart in Matplotlib? Okay, so now we're going to talk about PyGal. Right, some of you probably have used this before, maybe not, but this is a good short introductory to PyGal. So PyGal is another library that we can use. It is a dynamic SVG charting library and a little bit different than Matplotlib and PyGal. You can use browser to open up the format graph files. So the advantage of using PyGal is that it produces scalable vector graphics, or SVG, and that would be easily accessed via application like browser. So it's browser friendly and it's scalable without changing the image quality. Because if you stretch out certain image, right, it becomes worse or poor. Where if you do SVG, the quality remains the same when you change the scale when we're looking at sizing the image. So that's one of the advantage area for using PyGal, because it provides the opportunity to chart and save the chart as SVG. And you can use pip to install PyGal. And you can also find this information on our notes document. And also if you have the book, you can also refer to the book, or you can go to PyGal documentation. So let me find it. So in PyGal, there are ways so you can do different types of chart, right? If you look at PyGal and chart types, you can go to, you can have pie chart, you can have histogram, you can have XY, you can do lines, box, dot, tons, okay? So we're gonna look at how to do bar chart like this. And you can have it stacked or horizontally display, etc. So there's many style that you can use. But in the first step option, it talks about how you need to import PyGal after you do the installation. So we would install and then import. So PyGal is located on page 13 of your notes. Okay, and again, we can do pip install. What is an example of using plot as an analysis of an intrusion? So if you just wanted to look at intrusion, well, you can look at like network appliances or actually security appliance. Let's say that you have an attack already, right? A good way to really look at an attack, let's say that they are attacking your web server and like for denial of service, you can definitely graph that out for sure. Okay. We would look at the type of traffic packets that's being continuously sent, excessive amount, or a protocol that's being excessively used. So we can pull stuff from our network monitoring tools or even SNMP. And so you would have, so for example, if you look at like that particular area of the network, you can look at that switch or that segment, or you can look at a group of systems that are being impacted and then graph those. So and if you wanted to compare, or you can compare the attack or the victim, right? The system that's being attacked compared to something that's not being attacked. Okay. So you will have to evaluate packets. So in earlier we talked about packets, right? Depending on the type of attack, you can look at TCP or UDP. If you're just looking at like ping of death or something like that, that will be, you would have to just chart, right? Like dates from or time boundaries from the time before it starts into the time that it starts, and so you can see the peak. So yeah, you can use Matplotlib that way to look at analysis for different time stamp or time sequence. No problem. So going back just to chart, looking at protocol, looking at packets count, and you can use the dates and time, the time module or date module to bring that in. Okay, so let's talk about PyGal. And here it shows you can import in PyGal. You can do the line chart like this. That will give you the line chart. Okay. And in the documentation, you saw that there are different ways to chart. So let's look at the next question. So here for question 11, we want to refer to the documentation. We want to write the script to create bar chart for firewall filter packets. And I'm just putting in values there. You're going to look at thousands in an enterprise. Okay. You can also look at packet sizes, compare packet sizes, etc. So IPS filter packets compared to the firewall filter packets. Let's say that we have one that's blacklisting and then one that's whitelisting. You can look at the comparison there. So we're only doing 2 devices. So we want to save the result as bar chart 1.svg. And the difference in this and using PyGal is that you want to output file as SVG, right? As we mentioned in number 10, compared to the last one, Matplotlib, we can output it as a .png and other type of image file. So here, you would start with import PyGal. And then if you wanted to bar chart, you just do bar underscore chart. So you just declare what bar chart is, right? And we would simply pass the dot bar here. So we would do a PyGal dot bar, and that would allow us to use bar underscore chart. So you can name this anything you want, but we wanted to keep it like that would tell us what we're doing there. And then you simply just add in the data. So you would do a dot add. You would have a string and then a list of your values. Kind of like the last one. Again, we would do the add for the second set of data, which is this firewall filter packets, and then the set of values in the list. And then we can do a bar chart dot show. But if you wanted to output to file, you need to use render to file with the underscore. So bar chart dot render to file and then the file name. Okay. I don't think it uses the show method. I gotta check. I think it uses render. Sorry about that. So if you wanted to render to display, you would use the render method. And then you use the render to file if you wanted to output that to a file as the .svg. So just to let you know, you should expect this as part of your requirement, one of the requirements for your project to be able to visualize your data. Okay. So it's a little different than the last library, but we see the similarity, right, in the use of the data or incorporating the data into the Python script and use that library in order to visualize your data. Any question with 11? Okay, so you can play with it. You can add, you know, you can modify the style, the look. And then if you wanted to expand, you can take a look at how to use tables and so on. One of the cool thing about PyGal, I think you probably seen this or seen a little bit of it when I show the documentation, is you can add in maps. Okay. And with PyGal, you can add in like, you know, different country maps and so on, like this. World map, etc. So if you think about, you know, having an application that utilize map like this, you can import PyGal and then you can use the map feature on it. Okay. And when you use stuff online, like I don't know if you've seen like, you know, the map of attacks, right? From Viking or from North, right? North is they map out like different type of attack live. And so some of this, right, in the actual interface, you would see that it uses maps. So it shows like which country is attacking which country, what part of that country is being attacked, etc. So doing something like that is what we've been talking all along about, how to track, right, the protocol, how to look at the protocol and analyze it, and then how to incorporate the library to map that out visually. Okay, so there's additional component in showing little lines shooting across us when they do like denial of service or something like that. You know, what am I talking about if you're not familiar with it? If you do like Viking network live attack map, you find it Norse, right? It takes a lot of bandwidth. So that's why I don't illustrate it, but you know, I usually show little kids. And then there's threat map. There are a lot of different websites that does it, but Norse has been one of the first one that launched it. Okay. Okay. So let's talk about one more thing and then we'll wrap it up. So PyGal information on the notes. The author shows the browser usage, right, to do the comparison with different browsers there, so you can plot for a lot of different things outside of just network. And in the book, it shows you how you can plot it with lines and dots. Looking at the program that he showed is looking at the packets, right? Similar to the last one, but outputting it with the SVG. And so the last item for our list today to cover is Cacti. And Cacti is a web-based network monitoring graphing tool. Okay. So it allows you to monitor your network and graph it. I know Wireshark has that capability, but that would be more native where you would install it for your OS to run it as an application. So if you're looking for something that will be web-based, Cacti is the thing. And Cacti allows you to customize your data query feature using Python. It uses Python as the input method. Okay, so you can use Python as the input method for Cacti. To install Cacti, you simply just do a sudo apt-get install Cacti. It is web front end, and it has the database back end. So this is best to be used with a database like MySQL database, or you can use it with the web server, connecting that with the database. So if you're looking at web-oriented tool, Cacti would be one of the, for networking that is, right? Network monitoring, Cacti would be a good option. So you can refer to the documentation here. And the interface, it would look like this. So you would have a tab for console, and then a tab for graphs where you would get the visualization of it. You can enable SNMP details, and you can specify the host information like IP address and the OS type. Okay. So this shows you a picture of what that would look like. There would also be templates that you can use. You can import in templates and export the template out. So check out Cacti. See if you can look at how you can interface Cacti. And so in this graph, or in this image, it shows you like Cisco CPU usage. Like earlier, what we mentioned, we wanted to check the Cisco performance or appliance performance. You can look at its speed, right? The address information interface, kind of like how when you're on your OS, you can look at, like in Windows environment, you would look at Task Manager and you would go to the Performance tab, right? On Linux or Mac OS, you can look at your system usage information. So it allows you to monitor something like that as well. So if you're looking at health for your systems and connectivity for your system, this is a good one to use with web, that's web-based. So for the next question, what is the purpose of Cacti and how do you install it on an Ubuntu server? It is an open source web-based network monitoring and graphing tool. It is designed as a front-end RRD tool, but keep in mind that you want to tie it to a database so that way you can store the details that Cacti gives you. So it allows you to do data query feature using Python. Basically, it is a package that you can install, but it is a web-oriented tool or application. And to install it, you simply do sudo apt-get install Cacti. Any question? Okay, so I encourage you to read the chapter if you have the book, right? Or you can go through the notes and then test your script. But if you complete with all your answers, and if you write your script on IDE, you can screenshot in your code. That's fine too. You don't have to copy and paste it. You can upload your document that contain your answer to your exercises in the assignment. We have no class on Wednesday, don't forget. So the next time I will see you will be next Monday. We have next week and then we'll have spring break. Michelle? Any question? Okay, no question. All right, everybody, have a good afternoon. Okay, yes,
See you next
Michelle.
Monday.
Yep, take care. Michelle, you have questions? Thank you for putting your name in.
I had to leave the other laptop first, so it wouldn't
Okay.
backlash. No, I was just gonna say I've never been in the gold division before, and it was really hard for me. I haven't played in a year, so I was really rusty.
Okay.
And I was just downloading tools and